This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am here with Mr. Wine Anorak for the second time in Good Food Revolution's history. I think that Jamie Goode here was actually one of our very first podcasts, taken very amateurly at Wellington's Pinot Noir 2010 Symposium. How are you, Mr. Jamie Goode?
I'm very well.
Now, this is your very first time visiting Canada.
Yeah.
What are your opinions of our wonderful country thus far?
Well, I'm a day and a half in and probably about 70 wines in, so I would hate to make any grand pronouncements about Canadian wine, the future for Canadian wine and all these sorts of things that journalists often do. But I would say that I'm very pleased that I've found lots of wines that I can be very enthusiastic about, and I've maybe found a dozen wines that I could say this are really interesting, compelling wines. There's lots of personality, lots of character in these wines, and so my overall experience so far has been really positive, and it's exceeded my expectations. And also the weather's been fantastic, which always makes a big difference. And
you weren't here for the enormous storm we had just a few days ago, were you?
No, fortunately I missed that. Yeah, I heard that Toronto almost got flooded.
It was pretty serious. Now, when you say there are certain wines that you feel happy speaking about and you're quite excited about, would those be particular varietals, particular winemaking styles?
Well, it's far too early in my journey into Canadian wines to make too many pronouncements, but from my initial sampling, that caveat probably needs to be made. I'd say I've been very enthused by some Pinot Noirs I've tried, have been really good. One from Prince Edward County, which is absolutely superb. I'm going there tomorrow, so I'll probably discover more about that area.
Would you be at liberty to tell me which one that was?
I would if I'd remembered the name. But I would like to try a few more before I single out any one particular attention. I've had some cracking Gamets today as well, which has really surprised me.
Yeah. They're quite. Matt Kramer said this. I think one of the. I think it was at the Somewhereness, or no, actually I think it may have been for I4C, where he said, you guys should plant more Gamay in his keynote speech. Yeah. Gamay does pretty well over here. Yeah,
Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is kind of seen as sort of slightly second-rate grape, I think, by lots of people in the wine world. But I've tasted some really cool Cabernet Francs, including one that's a few years old as well. It seems to have been aging in a nice direction as well. Chardonnay, I'm slightly on the fence about Chardonnay. I've had some good ones, but I've had quite a lot that show maybe a little bit too much richness and this very, very rich, bold, warm mouthfeel. But then I'll be tasting a lot more later this week, so I can form some conclusions then. But I had some really good Rieslings as well, which is exciting. I think there's been some superb Rieslings. So that's in a snapshot. And sparkling wine. I had a really cracking sparkling wine as well. So these are the sorts of things that are exciting me so far.
Now, on to another subject. I recently wrote a small piece, very much taking inspiration from a number of your blog posts with regards to faulted wines. And this has nothing to do with Canadian wine, or everything to do with Canadian wine, to be quite honest. I was recently at Nebbiolo Prima and worked out that about 15% of the wines I had tasted were in some way faulted, so they never made it to my mouth. Now, that could be from myriad different faults or a combination of different faults. It worries me that there's too much bad wine still being made when, with the advancements in technology and viticultural practices, it should be reasonably easy for people to create is probably not craft, a good wine at a reasonable price point. What are your thoughts on that?
Generally speaking, across the wine world, the level of wine faults is still far too high, and I think that there's needs to be a more intelligent, nuanced discussion about wine faults, because some characteristics, and this is the problem, some characteristics that are caused by wine fault compounds are seen as positive attributes by certain subsets of consumers. So you've got wines going out there that some people would say were faulty, particularly technically trained winemakers, but then consumers are buying them and seemingly enjoying them. So this is a very interesting discussion, because at what level does a fault constitute a fault? And I think there needs to be much more discussion and focus and understanding of wine faults by the wine trade, because I think a lot of winemakers, the small guys in Europe and everything, probably don't wouldn't know reduction if it hit them in the face, for instance, or Brettanomyces. There's seems to be a very limited understanding amongst certain subsets of winemakers about, exactly what these fault characteristics are, and so you end up with people championing characteristics in wines that actually are caused by fault compounds.
I was just speaking in the article about the fact that two of my favourite wines are faulted to the extreme, if I'm to look at it from a technical perspective, being, say, some of the better Gevrey Chambertin, which I find are riddled with volatile, well, actually Brett more than anything else, and Chateau Moussard being infamous for levels of volatile acidity.
I love Moussard, but it's almost like it's a great wine to teach people about certain wine faults, Brettanomyces and VA particularly. But I think the wine works, and this is why we need to have a more intelligent, nuanced discussion about wine faults that sort of examines these aspects, and also the idea that sometimes a little bit of a fault can be something. It can be something that highlights beauty. Beauty is often highlighted by a slight flaw or imperfection that brings out the beauty in very interesting ways.
In people as well as wine.
Yes, I think it's true. Yeah. I think there's sometimes what is perfection? What is beauty? And these are interesting questions.
Do you think
quite philosophical here, I guess, but these are really interesting questions about the nature of faults.
Do you feel that perhaps we drink too many clinically made clean wines these days, that when in competition, for example, we're given a wine with some kind of fault going on, it really, really stands out for us?
Well, this is why we need to segment the market, because I think the commercial level, the commodity wines, they're much better if they're fault-free. Completely fault-free, clean wines work much better, showing just pure fruit characteristics. So when you get to the higher echelons of the market, the segments, the fine wine segments, or even that slightly mid segment, where suddenly a little bit of character and personality can really drive a wine. And I think we, just pure, clean, direct, fruity wines don't have enough characteristic and personality. In particular, this non-fruit complexity aspect is really interesting. It's the idea that where you get, for a wine to be really interesting, it has to have more than just pure fruit. So where does that non-fruit complexity come from? And sometimes it's these little traces of fault, like for instance a little bit of matchstick reduction in a Chardonnay, that can really propel a wine into another league.
Now, this opens up a whole can of worms, but we don't have to make it a long answer. When it comes to faults, strangely, it's still a hot button topic. The whole thing of natural wines is still very big here in Toronto and Canada. And I have to say that I've never tasted as many, often quite badly, critically faulted wines in the natural wine scene. Your thoughts, sir?
My thoughts, let's reduce it to this level. When I go to a natural wine fair, I go around and taste wines, and I enjoy myself. Not every wine is great, but I just have lots of fun, and I enjoy tasting and drinking those wines. And I know there's no definition for natural wine, and I think that's probably a good thing. It's just the fact that this is a banner under which these sorts of producers choose to align themselves, and they're often interesting people making interesting wines from interesting places, and I enjoy a lot of them. So, in some senses that's where the technical person might go along and have a fit, because they're angry and distressed that so many faulty wines can be enjoyed by so many people. But in the way I look at it is that I actually find that they're wines that are interesting and enjoyable. Setting aside those technical aspects, just going along and seeing people engage with those wines is really good. I'd love to see these consumers going to natural wine fairs and engaging with those wines, and often they find them really interesting.
Well, that's one of the more intelligent, eloquent and informed answers that I've actually heard for quite some time in asking that question to a number of people. Jamie Goode, Wine Anorak, thank you very much for joining us again at Good Food Revolution.
You're welcome.
Have a great time in Canada.